Hello guys, welcome back. I'm just going to read this book for another hour or something, but I'm going to show you something that I found that was interesting whilst I was doing my research. Looking at place names and looking at old churches and discovering old saints that I never knew existed. But anyway, before I do that, I want to mention Jonathan McTimmy's his channel. The link for his channel's in the description. He's reading this as well, but he's reading it slower, he's more articulate, he's got his own view, and whilst he's reading the book, he's doing his own research as well, sort of on top of it. I'm following him so far, but I've so far went past him in the book. I just want to read the book and then do all the research after, take notes whilst I'm reading the book and do all the research afterwards. But I want to show you something, guys, that's I found pretty interesting and rang a few bells, to be honest. This was up in Lewis again, the Isle of Lewis I was showing you previously. And I think this relates to Levi, the tribe of Levi. But it was a place called Paul Moulay, and it was Saint Molag's church. And I've never heard of this Saint Molag. I found this church in Lewis. The Scottish Gaelic terms Paul Moulay is a 13th century temple in the village of Europe. This is where I was saying before, where I found Europa. I think Plato talks about this place in his Atlantis, his takes on Atlantis. Anyway, in Ness. So the author, Comyns Beaumont, he mentions Ness. He thinks it's near Loch Ness, but I think it could be the Ness in Lewis. Anyway, in the Isle of Lewis. The church has a basic T-shaped structure with two small chapels on either side of the main body of the church. The southern chapel can only be accessed from outside. There's a lot of speculation about the ancient origins of this place of worship. One tradition tells that Saint Ronan founded the church before retiring to the Isle of Rona, and legend travelling on the back of a whale. The church is now used as a Scottish Episcopal church. There are ruins of another temple, Paul Ronay, about 500 metres northeast of Paul Moulay, and remains of another temple, Paul Feder, are about 2 kilometres south west of Paul Moulay, beside the old graveyard near the village of Swainbost. So I thought, interesting, Saint Molag. So I want to know who Saint Molag was. The church is dedicated to the shadowy figure of Saint Molag. It has been suggested that the church was built by the son of a Scandinavian king who had converted to Christianity. So we'll have a look at Saint Molag. Saint Molag, also known as Lua, Luan, Luanus, Lugay, Molag, Molog, Malua, Morlac, Melu, was a Scottish missionary and a contemporary of Saint Columba, who evangelised the Picts of Scotland in the 6th century. Saint Molag was a patron saint of Argyll, as evident by a charter of 1544 from the Earl of Argyll, which states in honour of God Omnipotent, the Blessed Virgin, and the Saint Moloch and Saint Moloch, M-O-L-O-C, our patron. The House of Lorne became the kings of Dalradia and eventually united with the Picts to become the King of Scots. Molag was patron saint of the kings of Dalradia and was an apostle of the Picts, so is highly likely to have been the first patron saint of Scotland. But where else have we heard Moloch in the Bible, guys? Spelt like that, Moloch. Let's see. Moloch, Phoenician, is a biblical name relating to a Canaanite god associated with child sacrifice. The name of this deity is also sometimes spelled Molech Mulcom or Malcolm. The name Moloch results from a dysphemic vocalization in the Second Temple period for theonym based on the root MLK king. There are a number of Canaanite gods with names based on this root, which became similarly associated with Moloch, including biblical Malcolm, great king, which appears to refer to the god of the Ammonites, as well as Tyrian, Melkart and others. Rabbinical tradition depicted Moloch as a bronze statue heated with fire in which the victims were thrown. This has been associated with the reports by Greco-Roman authors on the child sacrifices in Carthage to Baal Hamon, especially since archaeological excavations since the 1920s have produced the evidence of child sacrifice in Carthage, as well as inscriptions including the term MLK, either a theonym or a technical term associated with sacrifice. The Phoenician god was identified with Cronus due to the parallel theme of Cronus devouring his children. So what I think, guys, is that old Saint Molag, this old chap, I think he was actually a pagan god. I think he was Moloch, the pagan god, a Celtic god, Moloch, before they Christianized him. They turned all the Celtic gods into saints. These saints probably didn't ever exist. And they just... every god has a saint behind them. Just like Saint Brigante. That's another one that I found. Saint Brigante, an Irish female saint. And there's a few interesting stories behind her. She sounds like old Mary. Anyway, just something interesting I found, guys, and you should probably look into. But it falls in with this book as well that I'm reading. So anyway, back to the book. Hope you are having a good day, people. And like I said, a shout to Jonathan. He made me aware of this book, and he's doing a good job himself reading. He's much better with his the Greek pronunciations of words. I struggle a wee bit with the Greek words because all these words are completely new to me. A lot of words I've never seen before. But the Scottish and British and some of the Gaelic words I'm not too bad with. Anyway, I'll continue. In discerning the history of the past and the part played in it by the people of the Bible and classic nations, including also Plato's Atlanteans, one of the most important clues turns on the great port of Tarshish, which though the ages bore various names, it was the city of Gad or Kadesh. It was Gades or Gadir or Gadara. It was also Tartessus, the region of the traditional final destruction of the giants, when the gods defeated the giants and threw them in the deep in the earth, and it was, in addition to all others, the city of Sodom. As Gades, it was mentioned by Plato in relation to the island of Atlantis. That famous Athenian philosopher records that Gadirius, the younger twin brother of Atlas, settled in the extremity of the island in question and built a city called, as he says, Gades after him. Bible geographers who find it possible to slur over many scripture sites and conveniently ignore, for example, the evident relationship between Tarshish and Gades, have always been in a quandary to explain away the geographical position of Tarshish. They have to agree that it was identical with Tartessus, and they compromise by vaguely conceding the point that, together with the Isles of Chittim or the Isles of the West, it lay in Spain, and are consequently willing to recognise the present city of Cadiz as the site of this ancient port. So famous in Bible history as a venue of embarkation and return of the renowned ship of Tarshish, which sailed to Ophir on their 3-year voyages under the auspices of Hiram of Tyre and King Solomon, and was, moreover, the great port for tin and other ores. Nevertheless, it was not situate in Spain, for how could Gades, expressly described by Plato as placed in the extremity of the island of Atlantis, have been on the mainland of Europe? Nor, incidentally, could the Isle of Chittim, the Tin Islands, have existed off the coast of Spain, where the ocean depths preclude any such possibility. But, say the wise men, Cadiz is a variation of Gades, and if there has been tin nearby it found in the north of Spain, the answer to such objections is that Cadiz only obtained the name of Gades as late as in the time of Julius Caesar, so its prehistoric value is nothing, that the tin north of Lusitania was not mined in prehistoric days, and that the Tin Islands were known as the Cassiterides, and these definitely lay off Britain, not Spain. For all that, when Bible experts are compelled to concede that Tarshish and the Isles of Chittim lay in the west, in the Atlantic region, it opens up a big question, for they are inseparable from the geography of Palestine. How in this case did Palestine exist in the Near East? Why did Hiram's and Solomon's ships sail to and from this port in the Atlantic, more than 2,500 miles supposedly from Tyre or Joppa? To disclose the real site of Gades or Tarshish, I will first touch on Gadara or Gadaras, prominent in the times of the Maccabees under that name, but really the same city. And this was another name, guys, the Maccabees Revolution. And when you look at that name, Maccabees, it's so Scottish, it's unreal. But it actually ties in with Jewish stories for some reason, and that's a Scottish word, Mac. That's son of. Let us recollect that the apocryphal books of the Bible were composed at various ages by scribes sometimes different not only in epochs but in nationality as well. Gadara was a place of strength and noted for its remedial waters. It stood, we are told, at the extremity of the great plain, which included Bashan and adjoined the Sea of Galilee, as also did Hamath. It was famed for the healing virtues of its thermal and medicinal springs fed by a stream called Kalerho, among its patrons being Herod the Great, who took the waters of Gadara as a cure for the abdominal disease from which he died in great agony, probably from cancer. Strabo says the citadel of Gadara stood on a height at whose foot on the banks of the river were warm and healing springs and baths called Amatha, the Greek rendering of Hamath. The name Kalaraho, given to the springs or springs, is curious, for it has the same name mythically borne by the legendary mother of Geryon, who dwelt on that island near Gades, and it was also given to the water supply of Athens, according to Thucydides. These curative waters of Gadara, called Kalaraho, are related by Josephus to Lake Asphaltitis near Sodom, and were associated in some way with the destruction of Sodom. Lake Asphaltites, a seismic or meteoric lake of tar or pitch, like many similar lakes caused by earthquakes in modern times, in the time of the Maccabees had dwindled to a mere pond. My previous researches have led to the mouth of a river Avon and the Severn mouth, or Great Hamath, and I have mentioned that the Sea of Galilee could apply to none other than the Bristol Channel, the true Galil or Gaul, a name having every relation to Galil or Wales, but none to the Near East. In this vicinity stood the city of Gadara, and I claim that we may identify the citadel of Gadara with the precipitous eminence, a prehistoric forest controlling the north bank of the Avon at Clifton, 12 miles west of Bath. This immense was known as Ser Order, city of Chasm, the former city of an arch-druid, and stands immediately over St. Vincent Rocks. It covers an area of about 510 feet by 300 feet and is connected with two forts on the opposite bank of the river, one being Burwalls, and also with a defence system which embraces the Bristol area for many miles. At the foot of this eminence of Ser Order is the site of a former hot wells and baths, to this day commemorated by a railway station bearing the name of Hot Wells, such as Progress. The legend of King Bladud, cured of leprosy by the hot thermal waters, as related by Geoffrey of Monmouth, is that Bladud, the father of King Lear, being afflicted with leprosy, was driven an outcast from his throne. He became a swineherd on the banks of Avon, and observing that his swine, suffering from sores and scabs, were wont to plunge madly down the river steep bank to wallow in hot mud caused by a subterranean thermal stream issuing there, and were freed of their sores, following their example, and found himself cured of his leprosy. Thus restored to health and to his throne, he built hot baths at Bath, setting one expressly apart for lepers, and one such bath existed there in Collinson's time, as he mentions, not much over a century ago. Whether Blada erected the baths at Clifton or at Bath itself may be problematic, for the supposed site of this cure is still named Swineford and lies about halfway between the two. If these hot streams emanated from the direction of Sodbury, east of the present Bristol and the coalfield, the possible site of Lake Asphaltis as the original source of their heat might be explained. There is another significant indication of its Bible relationship. Gadara, as all know, provided the story of the Gadarene swine, one of the most striking parables of Jesus of Nazareth, and Jesus, it may be permissible to remark, according to Glastonbury and Cornish traditions, was known to the people in the West Country, and as a boy accompanied by his uncle, Joseph of Arimathea, who later founded the first Christian church in Glastonbury. The parable of the swine of Gadara, who dashed down a steep place into the sea, would have failed of its intent had not his listeners understood its application to relate a well-known episode, otherwise the blooded legend. In this story, therefore, we find in close proximity the origin of Gadarene swine tradition and Gadara itself, where was hot wells. That Gadara was situated on a precipitous height by a river is emphasised by Josephus, who relates that the Gadarenes clamoured against the tyrannical Herod, and in desperation some of them threw themselves down precipices and others cast themselves into the river and destroyed themselves of their own account. The Jewish historian portrays in these words a citadel by a river with precipitous cliffs such as Clifton affords, and some sought death by throwing themselves into the river below. It is by chance that this very site of Sair Order, the city of the chasm, commands such a chasm, today spanned by the Clifton Suspension Bridge, from whence an unhappy soul has committed suicide. The alleged site of Gadara in Palestine explains none of these matters, but really it has no existence at all, except as part of an arid plain. We read in the Wars of Josephus that the Vespasian captured and destroyed Gadara, where many rich men dwelt. Yes, at Gades, not in the arid wastes of the Near East. Vespasian destroyed Gadara, and he destroyed Bath nearby. We now turn to the evidence of the Roman writer, Rufus Festus Avenus, who vividly describes the west coast of England from Land's End northwards in the 4th century AD, and who visited Gadir, as Gadara or Gades was then named, or utilised the earlier information of the Carthaginian mariner Hamilco, according to his Ore Maritime, and started from Estremnes Peninsula, the farthest west peninsula. His name for Land's End he describes with a wealth of detail, the coastline from Cornwall to the mouth of the Avon and beyond. He mentions that beyond the strait he has described the English Channel. The sea develops a vast gulf to the Isle of Ophiuza, that is Serpent Isle, and states that the mainland opposite was called Estremnes and was inhabited by the Estremnici, extreme or far western people, but that a multitude of serpents drove out the inhabitants of Ophiuza and gave the name to an abandoned land. This reference, concerned with the coastline along the west of Cornwall and Devon, can only apply to Lundy, that strange granite earthquake-racked island which lies 12 miles off Heartland Point, answers in every way to Ophiuza, for serpent was consistently employed by the ancients to indicate celestial fire or lightning, accompanying an earthquake frequently, or if struck by a meteor. Its towering and perpendicular cliffs yield every evidence of its former devastation from on high, notably the Devil's Line kiln, a deep funnelled cavity gouged out of the rock by some celestial weapon, its missing portion being probably the shutter rock nearby. its punch bowl, another meteoric residue, and in another category an ancient Logan stone indicating its ancient inhabitants. This island, once far greater in size, was at some time pulverised by a celestial bombardment of extreme violence, and all sign of its former occupation were swept away, except for a few tumuli in the Logan stone aforesaid. Incidentally, here may remain one of the Isles of Chitam, the Isles of the West, which included the original Cyprus, once the resort of the fleets of Tyre and Tarshish. Ovid, we recall, in Metamorphosis, accorded this very same name of Ophusa to Cyprus, which was devastated by earthquake. Proceeding northward from Ophusa Isle, Avienus next mentions a temple consecrated to the goddess of the lower regions, a grotto of deep obscurity which lay beside the vast marsh called Erebia. This vast marsh or swamp agrees entirely with the former inland and marshy lagoon of Somerset, to which the Romans accorded the name of Uxella. The allusion to Erebia recalls the Meribah and Kadesh of the Old Testament, both being probably derived from the Hebrew Ereb, the dark or west side of the earth, like Erebus, a name for the underworld, with which the obscure grotto scared to the goddess of Hades, Persephone, accords as consistent with this region. Mr. Watmore, in his Insulae Britannicae, suggests that the name of Europe, fabled sister of Cadmus or Cilix, whom they went to seek in the west, was another version of Erebus or Ereb, and it was originally indicated not the present Europe, but only the farthest west of Britain. And like I say, guys, I found Europe in Lewis, which is in the farthest west of Britain. This ancient waterway, most of it formerly swampy except where certain heights stood out as islands, owing to its low level into which surged the tides and the outgoings from 4 rivers, stretched from the foot of the Mendip Hills to the vicinity of the Taunton. Collinson thus described it: "The coast from this point, the mouth of the Parrot, northward is flat and composed of vast sandbanks, repelling the inundation of the sea, and which in ancient times, precedent to the birth of history, washed over these shoals and flowed up into the country to a very considerable distance, covering with its waters the vast territory called Brent Marsh and the moors as far as Glastonbury and Somerton. Altogether it occupied an area of over 400 square miles. From the Erebia, then, Avienus sailed onwards and observed other landmarks. Inciting him, I placed the suggested interpretations in brackets. Thence from the marsh flows the Iberus River Brew, whose waters fertilise the fields. Most people aver that the Iberes owe their name to this river and not to that Iberus which flows through the midst of the turbulent Vasconas, Spain, Ebro, for all the territories which border the river on the west are called Iberian. The eastern parts contain the Tartessians and the Kilibiceni, Celt, Cheni. Then Mount Cassius rises, Tin Mountain, and because of the Greek tongue has given the name Cassiteros to tin. One sees where a temple which advances to the sea in the height of Gerontis, Whorlbury, so called by ancient Greece, viewed from afar whence Geryon received his name, or Geryon. There stretch the coasts of the Tartessian Gulf, Bristol Channel, and from the river Tarteus, River Parrot, to this place, Gerontis, is a day's journey. There is a city, Gadir. First it was called Tartessus, formerly a great and rich city, now despoiled, humble, poor, a heap of ruins. Except for the cult of Hercules, we have seen nothing remarkable about this place. The river Tartessus, spreading widely from the Ligustian swamp, Uxella, covers all parts in its course. It flows not in a single current, hollows out no one bed, but from the side of the Don washes across the fields by 3 channels, and by 4 others washes the cities of the south. Above the Ligustian swamp stretches Mount Argentarius, Mendip, so called by the ancients because of its fame. When we analyse these statements more closely, certain features emerge. Avienus' allusion to the Iberus River, today the Brew, proves that he is speaking of Britain and not of Spain, for he carefully discriminates between the Bru or Iberus and the Ebro or Iberus, both drawing their name from the Iberians, but that the Ibers of Britain were the older. As to the Ibers in the west of Somerset, different from those in the east, it is a well-known fact that the Iberian people inhabited the western parts of Somerset from the Neolithic period at least, in contrast to those of the eastern parts. Knight says that the eastern Somerset folk are yet tall with fair hair and dark eyes. Those of the western half are shorter with darker skin and hair. The description of the river Tartessus completely agrees with the character of the Parrett, the principal Somerset river, apart from the Avon. It does advance through the agricultural lands by 3 channels or tributaries, the Isle, Ivel and Tone. They do flow from the east, and 4 streams meander through the former Auxilla, named the Parrett itself, the Bru, Axe, and the North Somerset Yeo, which formerly helped to flood the swamp, which Avienus calls the Ligustian swamp, as well as Arabia. The Tin Mountain, Cassius, is likely reference to the zinc mines of Mendip, where zinc of old was often identified with tin as an alloy of copper. Mount Argentarius is more easily recognised as relating to the once famous silver-lead workings of Mendip, an ancient industry largely exploited by the Romans. Some years ago, a large pig of silver-lead was unearthed at Charterhouse on Mendip, stamped with the letters EXARGVE, interpreted as from the silver-bearing vein, but the words could better still have signified ex argentario vena, from the Argentarius mine or vein. For the one is a generalization, the other characterizes and qualifies the exact location of Mendip. Mendip silver lead, it may be added, was once esteemed as silver, and as such was minted by Charles II and William III and the 3 succeeding monarchs, all hallmarked with the rose. Another direct pointer to the directions of Gadir is the reference to the height of Gerontis. According to mythology, Geryon dwelt on an island called Erythea, or the Reddish, where his oxen were guarded by the 3-headed monster Eurytion and his 2-headed dog Orthros. Hercules, in his 10th labour, reached Geryon's islands by sea, seized his oxen and sailed with them to Tartessus, after which he erected one of the famous pillars of Gades, and the other in Libya opposite, the latter allusion to the pillars being possibly a later embellishment. Geryon, a king or magician, according to one version, a son of the Gorgon Medusa, famed for magic arts, and to another as the son of Chrysaor, the pelagic name for Hephaestus, the arch-sorcerer, dwelt near Gades or Tartessus in the hitherto fabulous garden of the Hesperides. These clues to Geryon's magical connections, added to his monstrous guardian, familiar Eurytion, and his barking, savage 2-headed dog, Orthros, convey in such matters the suggestion that the island was strongly fortified by certain ancient ordnance, possibly by 3 barking guns in one direction and 2 lesser pieces in another. Right, I was interrupted by my phone there. Three barking guns in one direction and 2 lesser pieces in another. To get to the truth, one must humorize such tales. Geographically, we realise its close proximity to Gades or Tartessus, and that, it is seen, lay in the vicinity of the Bristol Channel. When Hercules erected his pillars, one at Gades or thereabouts and the other at Libya, opposite it may be noted that in accordance to Avinas, Libya faced the left coast of Europe, which he indicates another work represented Ireland. Thus we may find a solution to the meaning attached to the pillars of Hercules. You may identify with some certainty, I think, that the reddish island of Erythea was the red and rocky peninsula of Warbury Camp, which towers above the town of Weston-super-Mare, a former outlying, a very powerful fortress which guarded the sea approach to the Avon and was defended the silver mines of Mendip. The strom of this notable landmark is Red Marl, of which a vein stretches southwards in a narrow band from opposite Sayre order, in which Warbury is another crop. Right, I'll leave it just there. I need to do something. I'll be back soon.